The rain had been falling for hours, soft and persistent, as if the city itself were shedding quiet tears. Emma hurried along the nearly empty streets, her coat pulled tightly around her, damp hair clinging to her forehead. In one hand, she clutched a small brown paper bag containing the few groceries she could afford that week. Life had been relentless lately, pushing her in every direction and offering no rest. Between her job at the local diner, her father's mounting medical bills, and the endless worries about rent, she felt like she was constantly running on a treadmill, moving, but never getting anywhere. At the corner of Maple Street, she noticed an old man sitting on a bench. He was hunched slightly, his threadbare coat soaked, a worn-out suitcase beside him. Most passers-by avoided him, their eyes fixed on the pavement, umbrellas held tight. But something about the man's presence made her stop. Perhaps it was the subtle dignity in the way he held himself despite the harsh weather, or maybe it was the faint glimmer of warmth in his tired eyes, a spark of humanity that refused to be extinguished. "Are you okay, sir?" Emma asked softly, taking a hesitant step closer. The old man looked up, surprised by the sudden attention, and then smiled a small, grateful smile that reached his eyes. "I'll be fine. Just waiting for the storm to pass," he replied in a voice both gentle and weary. Emma hesitated, glancing at her umbrella. "You might need this more than I do," she said, offering it to him. He accepted it with a quiet nod, holding it with hands that were lined and trembling slightly. "Thank you, young lady. That's very kind." They sat together on the bench, sharing the shelter of the umbrella. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Emma found herself observing him, the way his fingers lightly drummed on the bench, the faint, almost imperceptible shiver in his shoulders, and the way his gaze seemed to carry decades of memories, some joyful, others heavy with loss. She wondered what had brought him here, to this cold corner of the city, alone. "I don't get many visitors these days," he said finally, as if reading her thoughts. Emma smiled gently. "Sometimes, we don't notice the people around us. I think it's easy to forget that everyone has a story." The man nodded, a hint of melancholy in his expression. "Indeed. Stories are often hidden, even when they're staring us in the face. I suppose I'm just another unnoticed one in the city." Emma felt a pang of sympathy. She understood what he meant more than she could explain. Life often moved too quickly for anyone to notice those who struggled quietly beneath the surface. She thought of the nights she had gone to bed hungry, the times she had wondered how she would make it through the next week, and the rare moments when a stranger's kindness had made all the difference. "May I ask your name?" she ventured. "Arthur," he said simply. "I'm Emma," she replied, offering a small smile. "It's nice to meet you, Arthur." They shared a quiet conversation under the umbrella. He told her that he had once been a teacher, that he loved poetry and long walks in the park, that he had traveled extensively in his younger years. His voice carried a calmness, a reminder of a life that had been full of experience and learning. Emma shared small pieces of her own life, her struggles at work, her father's illness, her hopes for a better future. They didn't overshare or pry too deeply. There was no judgment, no expectation. Just a quiet recognition that two lives, brief and fragile, had intersected on a rainy evening. As the rain gradually eased, Emma realized she had been sitting on that bench far longer than she intended. The world around them remained cold and wet, yet something in the small act of sharing her umbrella and her company had shifted something within her. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace, a lightness that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the quiet human connection she had just experienced. Arthur looked at her, his gaze softening. "You remind me that there is still kindness in the world," he said quietly. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. "And you remind me that even when life is hard, there are people willing to notice, to care, even in small ways," she replied. As she finally stood to leave, She felt an unfamiliar gratitude for the moment, a recognition that sometimes, the world's beauty is found not in grand gestures or loud declarations, but in the quiet intersections between strangers. She walked away slowly, her umbrella tucked under her arm, carrying with her a sense of hope she hadn't realized she was missing. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a glistening city, washed clean and renewed. And in the midst of the ordinary, the mundane, she felt something extraordinary, the simple, profound truth that kindness could still be found in unexpected places. Even a single shared umbrella could remind someone that life and humanity were worth believing in. Over the next few days, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Arthur. Every time she passed the corner of Maple Street, she half expected to see him sitting on that same wet bench. But the street remained empty, the bench abandoned, as if the moment they had shared was just a fleeting echo of kindness. Yet, the memory stayed with her. Something about that brief encounter had lingered, like a soft light in the corners of her mind. One evening, on her way home from the diner, Emma noticed a familiar figure through the foggy window of a small neighborhood cafe. Arthur was there, sitting alone at a table, quietly sipping a cup of tea. His suitcase rested beside him, and he looked as if he had been waiting for something, or perhaps just contemplating the world. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon, yet here he was, still quietly present in the city that often ignored people like him. "Arthur," she called softly as she entered the cafe. He looked up, and when his eyes met hers, a faint smile spread across his face. "Emma," he said warmly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," she replied, taking a seat across from him. The cafe smelled of warm bread and coffee, a comforting contrast to the wet streets outside. They began to talk. Arthur spoke of his life with a mixture of nostalgia and gentle humor. He had been a teacher, he said, and had spent decades helping young minds navigate the world. Life had been kind in some ways, cruel in others, and now, he found himself in the quiet corners of the city, surviving on small comforts and the occasional human connection. Emma shared pieces of her own struggles, but she didn't dwell on the sadness. She spoke of her father's illness, the long shifts at the diner, and the weight of responsibility she carried every day. Arthur listened without interruption, his presence calm and grounding. There was no judgment, no pity, just the quiet understanding that only someone who has faced life's trials can offer. A few days later, Emma decided to bring Arthur a sandwich from the diner. It wasn't much, but it felt like something tangible she could do to show her care. She walked into the cafe, slightly nervous, but Arthur's eyes lit up when he saw her. "You didn't have to," he said, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I wanted to," Emma replied, setting the sandwich on the table. "It's not much, but it's something." Arthur looked at the sandwich, then back at her, and for a moment, the room seemed to pause. Finally, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small, worn book of poetry. "For you," he said, handing it to her. "For when you feel lost or need a reminder that the world has beauty, even in the smallest places." Emma accepted it, touched by the gesture. She opened the book to a random page and read the lines aloud quietly. They spoke of hope, resilience, and the quiet miracles found in everyday life. She realized that this simple act, sharing food, sharing words, sharing time, was far more powerful than any grand display of generosity. Over the next few weeks, Emma began visiting Arthur at the cafe more often. Sometimes they spoke at length, sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the city go by. Emma started noticing small things: how Arthur always greeted the barista with warmth, how he tipped generously even when he could barely afford it, how he seemed to notice the unnoticed. Through him, she began to see the world differently, with more patience and a deeper sense of compassion. One rainy afternoon, Emma arrived to find Arthur looking unusually quiet. He smiled when he saw her, but there was a shadow in his eyes. "I'm feeling a bit under the weather today," he said softly. but your visit has brightened it considerably. Emma pulled up a chair, refusing to leave his side. She realized then that this quiet connection had become something vital to her, not just a momentary comfort, but a source of strength. Arthur had reminded her that humanity wasn't always found in headlines or grand gestures. Sometimes it was in the sharing of a sandwich, the lending of an umbrella, the giving of attention when no one else would. As she left the cafe that evening, Emma felt a subtle shift within herself. She understood now that acts of kindness didn't need to be monumental. They didn't require recognition, fame, or applause. They could be small, quiet gestures, the kind that ripple outward without anyone even realizing it. The sandwich she had given Arthur, the smile she shared with a stranger, the simple act of listening, these were not just kindnesses, they were seeds. Seeds that could grow into hope, faith, and a quiet reassurance that the world was not entirely lost. That night, Emma sat by her window, the city lights reflecting off the puddles below, and opened a little book of poetry Arthur had given her. She read a few lines, letting the words sink into her. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months: hope. Hope not in some abstract sense, but in the tangible reality of human connection. She realized that her life, despite its hardships, could still be filled with these small, restorative moments. And she also understood that sometimes, it took someone else, a stranger, a quiet soul like Arthur, to remind her that humanity still existed in the world, quietly, patiently, waiting to be noticed. In that realization, she found a new strength. And though she didn't know what the future would hold, she knew one thing for certain: kindness, even in its simplest form, had the power to change lives, starting with her own. Weeks passed, and Arthur remained a quiet presence in the cafe, always with his little suitcase beside him and a warm smile for anyone who happened to notice him. Emma visited him regularly, bringing small gifts or simply sitting and talking, sharing moments of silence that felt as meaningful as any conversation. What she hadn't expected was how Arthur's simple acts of kindness would begin to ripple outward, touching the lives of others in ways neither of them could have predicted. It started subtly. The barista, who had once been impatient and brusque, began greeting customers with a smile, inspired by Arthur's warmth. A delivery driver started leaving small notes of encouragement for elderly neighbors in the building across the street. Even the cafe's regular patrons, who rarely spoke to each other, began exchanging small acts of goodwill: a compliment here, a shared pastry there, a door held open. Emma noticed it all with a quiet sense of wonder. It was as if the kindness Arthur had shown her had sparked something in the community, a gentle chain reaction that no one could fully explain. One afternoon, Emma and Arthur were sitting near the window, watching the gray city outside. A young man rushed past, clearly late for work, and dropped a bundle of papers on the wet pavement. Without thinking, Arthur stepped outside, scooped them up, and returned them to the young man. The man's face lit up with gratitude, and in that fleeting moment, Emma saw the truth of what she had been feeling: kindness was contagious, and it didn't have to be loud to be profound. Emma began noticing more of these quiet gestures everywhere she went. At the diner, a stranger helped a woman carry her groceries to her car. On the bus, a young boy offered his seat to an elderly man. In the park, someone stopped to help a lost dog find its way home. The city had not changed, it was still noisy, chaotic, and often indifferent, but these small ripples of care were appearing, like hidden threads weaving people together. Emma herself was changing. She smiled at more strangers, held the door open without thinking, and offered help whenever she could. Life was still hard, and her father's illness remained a heavy burden, but she felt lighter somehow, buoyed by the awareness that small acts of humanity mattered. She realized that faith in life didn't require grand victories or perfect circumstances; it could be nurtured quietly, moment by moment, through the simple, persistent practice of noticing and caring. Then, one morning, Arthur didn't show up at the cafe. Emma waited, a growing unease settling in her chest. When she asked the barista, she learned that Arthur had fallen ill and had been taken to the hospital. Emma's heart ached. She had come to rely on the quiet comfort of his presence, and she realized how profoundly his kindness had touched her life. Without hesitation, she gathered what she could: some food, a few personal items, and a small note of encouragement, and went to see him. At the hospital, Emma found a small circle of people around Arthur: neighbors, cafe regulars, even strangers who had been touched by his quiet acts of kindness. Each had brought something small: a warm meal, a blanket, a card. They had all come, without being asked, because Arthur had inspired them to care. Seeing this, Emma understood fully what it meant to live a life of quiet generosity. Arthur had not only restored her faith in humanity, he had reminded an entire community of the power of compassion. As Arthur recovered, the ripple effect continued. People who had once felt unnoticed and unimportant began to act with kindness toward others. Emma watched it unfold with a quiet awe. She understood now that kindness, once set in motion, could spread farther than anyone could imagine. It didn't require recognition or praise, it required only a willingness to see the humanity in others. One rainy afternoon, much like the day Emma had first met Arthur, she walked past the cafe and noticed a young boy helping an elderly woman across the street. She smiled, realizing that the same quiet lessons Arthur had taught her were now finding new life in unexpected places. The city, for all its chaos, was alive with these hidden threads of care, weaving together lives that might otherwise have remained isolated. That night, as Emma sat by her window, she reflected on the simple truth she had learned: kindness does not always announce itself with grandeur. Sometimes it is quiet, almost imperceptible, but its effects are profound. One small act can inspire another, and another, until the world seems just a little brighter, a little more humane, and a little more alive. Emma opened the little book of poetry Arthur had given her, and read a few lines aloud to herself. The words spoke of hope, resilience, and the quiet miracles of everyday life. She realized that these miracles were not distant or rare, they were all around her, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be acted upon. And she also realized that she, like Arthur, had the power to create them. In the heart of the city, amid the noise, the rain, and the struggles, Emma saw the truth: even small acts of kindness could restore faith in life. Even quiet gestures could remind people of humanity's enduring presence. And even the simplest moments: an umbrella shared, a meal offered, a word of encouragement could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that no one could measure, but everyone could feel. Months passed, and the city continued its steady rhythm: busy, chaotic, and often indifferent. Yet, amidst the noise and bustle, Emma noticed something remarkable: the quiet kindness Arthur had inspired had become woven into the daily lives of people around her. The ripple he had started had grown, subtle but persistent, touching strangers who had once felt invisible. And in that gentle transformation, Emma discovered a renewed faith in life, humanity, and the power of small acts to change the world. Arthur had returned to the cafe after his illness, looking a little thinner and more fragile, but with the same gentle warmth in his eyes. Emma greeted him with a hug, and for a moment, it felt as if nothing had changed except that everything had. Their connection, which had begun with a single umbrella on a rainy street, had grown into something far larger, a quiet testament to the endurance of human goodness. Emma's own life began to shift in ways she hadn't expected. Her father's health was still fragile, and the diner continued to demand long, exhausting hours. Yet, she felt lighter. She smiled more readily at strangers, paused to offer help when she could, and no longer carried the crushing weight of her worries alone. The knowledge that kindness existed, tangible, simple, and real, gave her strength. She realized that even in difficult circumstances, she could create moments of connection that mattered, moments that could ripple outward in ways she might never see. One afternoon, as Emma walked home from the diner, she passed the same bench where she had first met Arthur. A young girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, sat there alone, hugging her knees and looking lost in thought. Emma approached her slowly, recognizing a familiar expression of quiet despair. "Hi," Emma said softly, offering the girl her umbrella. "Do you want to sit here for a bit?" The girl looked up, startled at first, then nodded. As they sat together, Emma realized something profound: the kindness she had received from Arthur, the patience, the attention, the simple acts of care was hers to pass on. And in that small gesture, she could continue the quiet legacy of hope and humanity. She spoke gently with the girl, asking her about school, her friends, and what she liked to do in her free time. The conversation was light, but it carried something deeper, a recognition that someone saw her, that someone cared. Emma didn't know what challenges the girl faced at home, but for this moment, she offered something powerful: a sense of being seen, being valued, being human. That evening, Emma returned home and opened Arthur's book of poetry once more. She read passages aloud, savoring the words, letting them sink in. The poems spoke of resilience, quiet courage, and the miraculous beauty hidden in ordinary moments. She realized that faith in humanity is not found in perfection or grand gestures. It is found in the recognition that each small act of care, each smile, each shared meal, each word of encouragement has the power to restore hope. Emma thought of Arthur, of the young girl, and of all the people whose lives had been touched quietly, without fanfare or acknowledgement. The city had not transformed overnight, it remained the same bustling, noisy place it had always been. Yet, beneath the surface, something essential had shifted: a network of human kindness was growing, invisible yet tangible, fragile yet enduring. The next day, Emma returned to the cafe. Arthur was already there, reading quietly. He looked up as she entered, eyes twinkling. "You've changed, Emma," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I can see it in the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you look at people. You've taken what you've learned and made it your own." Emma smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in years. "I only hope I can continue it. There's so much loneliness and struggle everywhere. If even a small part of what you've shown me can reach others, then it's worth it." Arthur nodded, a satisfied, almost proud smile on his face. "It already has," he said simply. In the weeks and months that followed, Emma continued to notice the quiet effects of Arthur's influence. People held doors open for one another, shared umbrellas without a word, left kind notes for neighbors, and offered small gestures of care to strangers. And Emma, too, continued to act, inspired by the knowledge that the smallest act of humanity can change a life in ways no one can measure. One rainy afternoon, Emma passed a bench where a weary-looking man sat, much like Arthur had once been. She stopped, smiled, and offered him her umbrella. In that simple gesture, the story came full circle: a quiet act of kindness moving through the world, touching lives, restoring faith, and proving that humanity, though often hidden, is never truly gone. Sometimes, it takes just one person to remind another of the beauty in life. Sometimes, it takes a quiet story, a shared moment, or a simple act to restore faith in humanity. And sometimes, when that faith is restored, it spreads silently, invisibly, changing the world one small gesture at a time. Emma walked away, umbrella in hand, the rain no longer feeling oppressive but cleansing, a gentle reminder that life, like kindness, flows quietly but powerfully, leaving traces that endure far beyond what the eye can see. And in that realization, she understood something essential: humanity is alive. It exists in the quiet corners, in the small moments, and in the hearts of those willing to notice, care, and act. And as long as people like Arthur and now Emma exist, faith in life, and in each other, will never be lost.